I was playing on my tablet, my little computer thingy, and I made I'll share this on the website as well. But I made a note of some things we need to look at on here. So again, the white paper left behind for that bit of sparkle. We've got the water here, which is the lightest value. So we need to make sure that's probably almost just white of the paper or just a little bit of a stain. We've got dry brush for the tops of the trees. And that's my favourite way of painting trees. A lot of wet into wet in here as well, though. And we've got the light against dark here. So that's kind of draws your eye to this area. As he always did, he's kept everything simple. The trees are painted simply, and the reflections are nice and simple as well. We've got a nice little lead in here, takes us into the scene. So although it's a fairly straightforward looking painting, it's just very well done and very confidently painted, and some nice effects going on in here. And we've got the light against the dark here, which all you need is just a few areas of contrast and just nice washes. Is what watercolour is all about. And if you look at the colours, I just picked out 6 of the main colours in this scene, and you can see that it's going to be a winner whatever you paint with these colours, because it's just so harmonious, the colours here. And they're not bright colours, they're not colours straight from the tube. If we compared that to a couple of colours there straight from the tube, much brighter, that these are sort of greyed colours. But the painting doesn't look grey and horrible. It's it looks colourful, and there's a nice light and so on. So don't be afraid to go to these colours. But I won't worry about trying to match exactly these colours. It just gives me a bit of a guide to where I'm aiming, really. So I've just look in my head, yellow ochres, warm browns, and some purples, but steering more towards yellowy purple, and nothing bright. So I've done the drawing, which just mapped out a few things where they're going to be, and the traceable will be available as well. Start with the Skoda Ultimo for the sky. So plan of action will be is to paint the sky, lots of wet into wet, but not going too dark with it, and try and leave a bit of white paper. And we can bring that right down to the horizon here, and then we'll put the lightest yellow value on this foreground as well. But perhaps we'll just leave this white paper. We'll see how that goes, maybe, or maybe just put a little bit of a stain on it. We'll see. So colour wise, I'll start with some yellow ochre, and I'll just put just very small touch of that pyrrole red, could be cadmium red, whatever, just to warm that up slightly. And what you can do, as we're doing beginner demos, is to make things a little bit easier for yourself. In another well, you could mix the purple mix as well, so you've got it there ready to go, because we need the wet into wet in the sky, so we've got to be fairly quick. So that'll be okay for my purple. So that was just a bit of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. So it doesn't really matter which way you start, but I'll start with the yellow. So nicely load up brush, and I'm going along the top here, and rather than just go across like that, which I will do at the top there to make sure it stays wet, that if you go in abstract up and down, you might get some white paper left behind in more interesting shapes. And we can paint over the trees because they're going to be darker. And now I'll rinse my brush off. And what I did, I rinse it off, but I then just take off some of the moisture, because I'm going to pick up a lot of moisture here, and I don't want to water down this mix here. So put that purple in there, and again, it's just abstract shapes. It's pointless to try and replicate what he's got there. I'm going to just use water again, control the amount of water on the brush and just lose some of that. I don't want too much white paper there. And just anything that's an odd shape we can just get rid of. So I'm quite happy that as the sky, that that looks okay. It's the right tonal value. We've got some white paper left behind. That's all I was after. So I'll switch to another brush. So we've got this distant purple hill here. So that's just a slightly stronger mix than what we've just put in the sky there. So again, ultramarine blue, small touch of red. And just a very small touch of the yellow as well, just to tone it down a bit. And then I can just paint over there, and we'll get a soft edge because the sky's still damp, and I'm quite happy to have a soft edge all the way along if that happens. And we'll bring that down to about there, and that will disappear off behind those trees. And I'll rinse my brush off. So what I can do is, when it's dried a little bit, that I imagine he painted this outdoors, so his paper probably dried a little bit quicker, which is why he's managed to get a hard edge there. But I can just, before this dries, just sort that shape out a little bit, and then straight into, again, the yellow ochre mix, maybe just a small touch of blue in there just to create a watery grey to paint here, because we want a soft edge there, that we want to create that sense of distance. So this is sorting out all the wet into wet stuff. And again, it's no point in trying to match the colours exactly. It's just going to slow you down. So I'm happy with that. So I'm going to get a softer edge here because we're painting wet into wet. And this is just laying down the lighter value in the foreground. So just looking at where these shapes are. And then I can just start to warm it up a little bit as it comes into the foreground. Not that much. I have to be careful with that red. I very rarely use cadmium red for doing that. I normally would go to Mazarin crimson. And then I think if I just flick the brush up there for the grass area, because that's probably that part of the painting finish there, that I think we can use the white of the paper. Just use some of that purple just to grey that off. So that's just to lead us into the scene. And he would have done a little bit of wet into wet in this foreground. So just a bit of burnt umber and a touch of cobalt blue just to create a dark, just where a little bit less blue. We've got just a few dark areas in here, but if we get it in while it's damp, it will be less prominent. There's a tuft of grass or something there. Here's and again, just adding a little bit of contrast. And the thing with these master studies is, say, not to try and replicate, because you can't with all this wet into wet stuff, because it's all dependent on, you know, how damp my paper is and how damp your paper is and how damp his paper was. And I say if he was painting outdoors, it's a different thing altogether as well. I like the way he's showing that little tuft there, which is just painting a few darks in there. So the whole effect is to get it done so it looks like it's all just been confidently painted. So if you feel yourself now overworking an area, just stop. It's starting to dry now, so you know we'll lose that freshness if I keep going. I've got a little bit of a run back going in there, but I just have to accept that. You know, it is what it is. That you know, we can, if need be, to hide it, just put some trees there. You know, we don't have to stay completely true to this scene. I'll dry that off because the next step we're on dry paper. Excuse me, and I know that because he's done some dry brush for the tops of the trees, which we need to be on dry paper to do that. So with these master studies, it's a case of reverse engineering to see how it was made. That we've now painted the sky, that distant hill, this part of the bank, and around here. So next we'll be painting these trees here and these reflections. And I've done it this way because I know that these trees must have been painted onto dry paper to get this effect hard edge here, and also we've got hard edges in here, so again we know that was painted onto dry paper as well. So it's a case of knowing, and with watercolor you generally do paint the objects furthest away to start with and come forward, although we have painted the foreground here, but the reason for that was because I painted this light area here to get it as one continuous shape. It made sense to paint that at the same time. So now we're on dry paper. We can perhaps work on these trees over here. So we've got a nice lot of paint here. It's too watery at the moment, so all we've got to do is add more paint to that. So I've just put a big blob of blue in there. So it's still too watery and it's the wrong colour. So a bit of red. And it's getting closer. Touch of brown, a bit more blue. So we're now about the right sort of colour. I say close enough is good enough, and it's the right sort of consistency. So we can have a hard edge down the bottom here. So painted on dry paper, and it's got that interesting abstract shape there, which is whatever's there. So these are going to be hard edges down the base here, which is going to give us contrast, that we've got dark against light, but also contrast with the edges, a hard edge here as well. So normally I paint from the top to the bottom, but on this occasion I'm going to start at the bottom because I wanted to get that edge there controlled. And this brush is really loaded up, so I know I'm getting a lot of water on here. So I want to thin the paint out a little bit here. So what I can do is just wash my brush off and just put some water on it. And water, it will run up as it runs down, but this will go up into there as well. And he's created that atmospheric effect in those trees by having it thicker, darker paint at the base and a little bit warmer as well. So we'll mix on the paper a bit of burnt sienna in there. So if you're enjoying this really in-depth tutorial, please hit that like and subscribe. Even if you're actually been watching the channel for a while, just check that you have subscribed. Many of you haven't. I'm trying to get to 30,000 subscribers this year. Hopefully we can do it. And if you want to join my website, if you want to have access to all the reference images and lots of demos, the link's in the description. So let's get on with the demo. And just let that disappear into the water there. we'll get a soft edge. And same, we could just drop some water and just let it run down into there. So it's very damp up here at the moment, so I've got a little bit of time. I can just vary this edge by making this wet and having a good variety of edges as he's got there, some soft and hard edges. And like I say, just take inspiration from his painting. You know, we're not looking at making a exact replica. And I bet he even possibly just dabbed it with a tissue, maybe, just to create that soft effect. So now we need the tops of the trees. So thicker paint, less water, and just a warm dark colour. So I've got too much paint on there, so what I'll do is I'll just take a little bit off. Sometimes you can just do a little practice on the masking tape just to see, you know, is it coming off and leaving that dry brush mark. A bit more blue, I think. So when it does that, there's too much paint on there. So if I just dab it, we're now getting that broken line. So there's the tops of the trees. And all of a sudden that becomes a tree. And again, these are all just abstract shapes, so there's no point in trying to replicate his trees because it's a flick of the brush. There's some sky holes in there. I think I'll just mess that up a little bit. Don't want a hard edge there really, it's just something lighter there. And get to the point where it looks okay, you know, it's quite nice. We've got atmosphere there. It looks like a bush of trees. No, stop, move on to the next part. So we've got another bit here. And it doesn't look like what he's done, but it really doesn't matter. You know, we're just looking at, you know, I haven't really painted trees like this for quite a while, I don't think. So it's quite interesting to look at his method and think about how did he create that misty effect in there. And we've got all these colours mixing in on the paper by themselves. And it's lovely, that is. So we've got a hard edge here. So we're on dry paper. And I'm using fairly thick paint because I know this is where my dark against light is. So if I have it too watery, it won't have the right effect. So nice and strong there. So I'll be careful I don't put any water on there because I don't want to dilute that. But maybe I would want to dilute the bottom just to create a bit of softness. And that's too straight, so let's just make that slightly more abstract. And then some burnt sienna to warm things up. And this is just a great opportunity to have a play about with wet into wet technique. And all this stuff is what makes watercolours such a great medium. I don't think there's any other medium that does all of this. So I'll worry about the tops of the trees afterwards. Let's just get the body of the tree in, the row of trees. Again, sharp edges along the bottom, or a variety of edges. So more purple. And again, I had a comment today on YouTube to say, please can you tell me the colours you're mixing? And I try to explain it's impossible. You know, what colour did I just mix there? It had a 5% of mixed orange from something else, 1% of blue in the corner there, a bit of red, blue. It's just impossible. It just can't be done. You know, like again, I've changed it again. All I'm doing is adding blue in here because I want more of a purple colour, and I've got a colour that's too red, so I'm just adding blue into it to get to the purple I'm after. So sky holes, I wrote it down on the actual painting, photocopy or whatever, to remind myself. So there's my sky holes. So you can see the difference between that side and that side at the moment. So we now need to modify this to create that same effect. So how did I do that? I adjusted some of the edges by just adding some water down here. And if I did that all the way along, it wouldn't have the right effect because we need a combination of edges, hard and soft. I threw some water on the top, just let it run down. And what that's going to do, it's going to dilute the paint. So it's going to make it lighter. It's actually going to wash it off the paper as well. And too many sky holes, so I can get rid of some of those. Try not to get rid of all of them. And if you find, I've washed that off now and it's starting to look a bit more like that, that if you want to just mop that up, you can just dry that brush off and then just hoover it up. Or the other option you've got is we could channel it all over here and then use it to paint into those reflections if you wanted to. So tops of the trees now, before that dries. So again, just too much paint on the brush, just give it a little dab on there. That's more the amount. And there's a tree there. And again, we could just take a little bit of tissue if you wanted to. We could just lift out a little bit, but just a little bit. It soon becomes a bit messy if you start dabbing at it too much. And while it's still damp, I can put my dark back in there that I wanted. I've lost dark on that tree. So while the paper's damp, you can mess about with things, but as soon as it starts to dry, you've got to stop because you then start lifting paint off and so on. And if it looks okay, stop fiddling with it. So now the reflections, which I'd imagine he probably just used what was in the palette afterwards, what he'd just been painting those trees. And the way I like the way he's just painted them so simply, it's just flat shapes, and this works best in watercolour. That we were talking about that on the forum, that the simplest ways often looks best with watercolour. That go back to basics and just do things simply, and it reminds you that it just looks much better doing it that way anyway. So why don't we just do it simply all the time? That is, when we're trying to be clever, it doesn't have the right effect often. So there's the reflections, and you could try and replicate all those colors in the reflections and so on, but it's just not necessary. Obviously be careful not to completely follow his reflections, because your trees may have been painted slightly different like mine here. So let's just make sure they tally up. Get all that in while it's damp. And then we've just got a much darker reflection, but not that much darker. And that's given us contrast, dark against light. and also a sharp edge. I've got a dark shape there, but getting that done while it's wet, so it's damp. So that's just white of the paper there, and that is your best friend in watercolor. White of the paper, it's the brightest color you're going to get in watercolor, the white paper. And let's dry that off, because it will lighten as we dry it, and then I can judge this foreground better. At the moment that's too dark in comparison to the foreground. We just need to go slightly darker here, and as long as we stay in the same color scheme, so warm browns, we should be fine. And again, that's why these master studies are great for learning to paint watercolors, because they've sorted out the color palette for us. There's harmony in this scene, so we could have dark against light, which instantly brings this to the foreground. Can negatively paint those gaps in between those long grass there. And then I'll use the water to connect this up. I can also scratch out, make that a little bit less rigid. Just take some water, not to disturb the surface underneath too much. To connect these up, but leave some of that lighter tone underneath to come through. And what I would ask him is, why does he not put any birds in the sky? He'd probably say because they look silly. I'm going to do it. I've got a couple of blobs of paint there that's flicked up. I suppose maybe that's why I put birds in, because I'm a messy painter and I keep getting splatters of paint everywhere. So I'll take my trusty Skoda perler. Nice point on it. But I find where these splatters of paint land are often ideal spots for the birds. So where I scratched out, I could just put a few to let's not get carried away. I'll take the tape off. So this was about A4 size, so it's actually on a slightly bigger piece of watercolor paper that I'm just painting on this side. Again, full credit to Edward Wesson. Now it's his painting that we've just had a go at to try and replicate. But and it works because the color harmony is there, which again it's down to zoom out, get rid of that reference picture. It's all down to the color harmony which he's created there, with just quite a simple palette of colors up here that you can imagine them on the color wheel. They're all going to be close to each other. But I've got the color wheel here, but you know, they're all appearing, you know, on this side here with the browns. So it works from that point of view. So, and as long as I've got the tonal values in the right place, which we have, you know, I've got more softness here that I ended up going more wet into wet, but move that camera. But that's fine, you know, it just creates a slightly different painting. You know, it's more perhaps atmospheric on this scene here, and I quite like all this. It perhaps giving it a little bit of a misty look to it, but that's worked okay. But I definitely need to go darker in the foreground to give it that depth. But yeah, it reminds me, just keep these reflections simple, because that looks really nice. You know, the reflections, if I wasn't copying this, I probably would have started putting some reflections of trees, branches and so on in there, and it would lose that just nice watercolor, nicely freshly painted, not fussy, and it works well. So again, white of the paper, so important. I think just gives it life in the sky. And you know, it looks, obviously it's hard to tell on these. If we saw the original painting it would be different, but you know, I can definitely see he's retained white paper in the sky there. So we've been doing quite a few master studies on memberships recently, and if you want to do some paintings by other masters such as the master Edward Wesson and Monet and Sargent and whoever else we look at, join me on my website. Lots and lots of videos to get through. All the references are all there for you. So we'll see you soon, hopefully on a live stream if you join, and if not, I'll see you on the next YouTube video. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe.